name is Cornelius Schumacher. I'm working for Deutsche Bahn. My title is Open Source Steward at DB Systel, so I'm taking care of open source software there. But I'm also involved with the OpenRail Association, so I'm part of the OpenRail team, the technical committee. And today I want to talk about our efforts to put the railway industry on the open source track. First of all, I'm wondering, who of you arrived with a train at this conference? Quite a number of people. And maybe I shouldn't ask it, but I'm wondering, who was on time? Too early. I love to hear that. Okay, but we see apparently there's some room for improvement. We know that, we are working on it. But I think it's pretty clear that we have challenges in the railway sector. Especially I want to focus on a couple of challenges which are shared challenges. So all the railways, they have similar environment, of course. It's all trains on tracks, and we have challenges. We have standards, we have regulation, we have interoperability, we cross borders. So of course things have to work together, and we have things like safety, which is just not a differentiating factor. Of course, everybody has to be safe. There's no better or worse there, so it's just you have to do it. And these shared challenges, of course, are something which is challenging to address. And the approach with shared challenges, which makes a lot of sense, is to address them with shared solutions. Shared solutions help us to increase efficiency, may avoid doing things more than once, and we also come to solutions which in the end are better for everybody, which increase the whole sector so that trains in general can run better, and we are not competing over if a train is late or not, but over the quality of service or whatever. So what we want to do is here, we want to have shared solutions for shared challenges. And here I think I don't have to explain that much, that open source is a very natural way to address shared challenges, to come to solutions in collaboration. We know that in a lot of industries we are doing that. Also something I don't have to explain that much here. We have a lot of organizations which help with that. We have these kind of horizontal organizations like the Linux Foundation or the Eclipse Foundation, which help across industry, more focused on specific technology areas. But we also have quite a number of vertical foundations which help vertical industries, specific areas like automotive or energy or something. And there's a surprising number of them, but there wasn't one for the railway sector yet, so there was a gap. But what we do know is that actually railway companies are interested in open source and are committed to doing it. So 2 years ago, Deutsche Bahn published the open source manifesto, which said, okay, we do use open source, we realize that, we do want to do that in a responsible way, we also want to contribute where it makes sense. And also SNCF, the French railway, they also published a similar statement. So I think the companies, they have realized that open source has a value and it can also be applied to the railway sector. And with this commitment, we went and said, okay, let's go and found a foundation which fills this gap, which addresses the railway sector, and that's why I'm here. I'm talking now about the OpenRail Association. That's how we want to fill the gap, doing open source in the railway sector. Now, wait. A new foundation. In 2018, I was actually speaking at FOSS Backstage, and I remember that I said, don't create foundations. My reasoning there was, it's complicated, it takes a lot of time, it's hard to do, you distract from what you actually want to do. There are lots of reasons to not create foundations. So, still I'm here talking about creating a new foundation. So let's talk about why. One thing which is quite important to realize about the railway business is that this is not about software. The business is trains, it's bringing people from A to B, it's bringing freight to A to B. So software, of course, is a very important factor in that. We can't run the railway without software, but we are not selling software. It's not the business, the core business. So we are in an area where we need software, but it's not our core business. And this is something which is, for example, in the traditional open source foundations where software vendors are organized, it's a different mindset, it's different priorities, it's a different language we have to speak. And with that, yeah, carving out a special space for that sounds like a good idea. We also have to realize that open source is something which is not coming natural. I mean, if software is not the core of your business, then open source is even more difficult to communicate. I mean, why open source? Explaining that to people who care about trains and metal being moved around. Open source is just a side thing. So, and doing open source, of course, comes with something which is a cultural shift. It's a different way of working together. So to address this, you can't just go there and say, okay, we know how to do everything better and it automatically happens. So what we have to do is we have to reach the people where they are. We have to understand them. We have to talk their language. We have to convince with arguments which is not coming from our point of view in terms of how we do open source, and we know that, but how the people who are doing the railway business, what is important for them and what matters for them. And connect with them for the actual business problems we have at the railway companies and the railway business and address these. And for these, another factor which is also to consider there is that we are not coming from, we have an open source community with a project and we need something to organize it better and it has grown. But what we are trying to do here is something new. We are trying to build a new community. We are trying to build new projects which are addressing railway problems. So we have to first have something where people can find a place. And all these reasons led us to, after some discussions, and we discussed different options, led to the decision, okay, we do our own association, we do our own foundation, so that we have something we can really shape in exactly the way which is good for the business. And as a side note, one reason to not do it for open source project is, I mean, you will get a headache when you need to deal with administration and organization and all that, and bureaucracy. In the railways, we are actually quite good in dealing with bureaucracy, so this is not a preventing factor. So we founded this OpenRail Association. It's about 1 year old. Our birthday is on January the 7th. It's an international non-profit organization according to Belgian law, similar to the Eclipse Foundation and some other foundations. Founding members were the Swiss Railway, the French Railway, and the German Railway, and the International Railway Organization, UIC. And over the last year, a couple of new members also came in, Enter from Norway, Infrabel, also from Belgium, the Flatland Association from Switzerland, and ONCF from Morocco. So we have a good mix of railway companies. Also, the Flatland Association is more like a research academic organization. So it's growing. We are getting more members there. But more importantly, the core achievement, of course, was to have open source projects in the OpenRail Association. And we onboarded 5 projects. I will show them a little bit later. These 5 projects have 80 active committers at the moment, so it's still a small association. We're growing, but a bit more than a year ago, we had 0, so there's growth. This is nice. And if you want to have more information, here are the key facts, the website, the GitHub, the email address, how you can reach the organization. In terms of the organizational structure, it's, I think, a pretty much standard open source organization. We have members, that's the railway companies, the Flatland Association. They are electing a board of directors. You see the pictures here. And these are on the executive level in the companies. So, for example, the chair of the board is Jochen Decker, the CIO of the Swiss Railways. So these are people who their daily business, they are responsible for the daily business of establishing good IT in the railway companies. The core of the association, of course, are the open source projects. This is where the actual open source work happens. And kind of as a bridge, we have established the technical committee in between. There are a couple of members which are representing the project. So each project has a seat in the technical committee. And we also have a few appointed members for bootstrapping the technical committee and also to give some continuity there. And now to give a short overview about the projects. And they are coming from different domains. Which are quite exciting for people who are quite deep into the railway business. We are doing things like capacity management, network simulation, planning, timetables. We have the digital automated coupling, a project to automate freight trains to be able to couple their wagons together. We have things about condition monitoring of tracks, where we take camera pictures of the tracks, and there's the project with a standard format to store this data. We also have something like liblrs, which is a library to manage, it's a kind of a building block, which is managed to, used to manage linear reference systems. So if you're on a track, you have points there, you have to calculate them, you have to deal with them. So this is a big and small project, already quite a variety. And to give a bit more insight into one of them, OSRD, the open source railway designer, that's something which calls itself the digital twin of railway operations. This is a pretty powerful and impressive tool to simulate railway infrastructure. So you have things, you have the topology of the network, you can put trains on it, you can see how they run, you can calculate the running time, when they arrive, when you can take into account energy consumption, the power of the network and all that, and visualize this in various ways. You even get a fancy 3D view. So the people who really know about this topic and can give you a deep dive into that, it's a quite impressive simulation of a lot of aspects of the railway sector. And doing that as open source, of course, helps to solve these fundamental things in the railway sector, which are necessary for everybody. So all railways, of course, have to know where their tracks are and have to simulate how trains run there. So that's about where we are with the association. And what I want to do now in the rest of the talk is to talk a little bit more about the specific challenges and solutions we found and some of the lessons learned. So a lot of that is probably also known to you. A lot of things may have some nuances which are very different, or we also have some things where we really had to create new things. But I think it's really interesting to look into that, what actually helped us to achieve what we wanted to do, and where do we think do we have to put energy to move forward. One important thing is that as an organization which is supposed to attract diverse projects from the railway sector, so we are not based on a specific project, where we just give an organization beyond one project, but we want to have a lot of projects. We need a process to incubate them. Also, process, of course, is something, we need to interact with the organizations. And this is a process you probably have seen pictures similar like that. We, of course, base that on what we know from other foundations, so it's a little bit similar to what LF Energy or Cloud Native Computing Foundation are doing. We basically have four basic stages. The candidate stage is quite important for us. That's where we talk with other companies, where we talk with railways to identify which are the interesting projects, where is open source actually helpful to solve the business problems. And then when these projects apply, they get into stage one, which is the stage I would call formation, where we establish the basic principles. The second stage is focused on the quality. So we develop within the association, we develop projects to reach a high level of quality. And then the last stage, and I have to say that we haven't reached that yet after a year with any project, this will come, is the stage where we really have mature projects which are used in production by multiple companies, and where we recommend them basically as a standard solution in the industry. So this is the broad picture of how this process works. And we had quite some discussions about what are the criteria for that. So each of these stages is based on a certain set of criteria, and these are the most important ones we have listed in each stage here, where we can really say, we have a structured approach to say, okay, this is a project which actually is suitable for OpenRail, or this is a project which has high quality for, so we consider it to be production ready, or we have a project which really is so mature that we can recommend as a standard solution. And some things are quite obvious, of course. Our association is for railway-specific software, so the scope is not general IT, but it's about the railway-specific things. So that's where we require that to be in the scope. Of course, we also require open source, basically. It has to commit to open source. It also has to commit to, and I will talk about that a little bit more, to open governance. So an open source license is not enough. We want to have an open development model. Then on the quality stage, we have a couple of kind of metrics where we look at, we need activity in the project, so it has to be healthy, it needs to have contributors. Open governance, again, is quite important. It has to be mature, it has to be transparent. And we are also applying a couple of best practices where we say, okay, we want these projects to follow these best practices. They have to implement reuse as a standard. Quite sane requirement. We require DCO to have their clarity. We also require the OpenSSF scorecard so that there is some transparency about best practices in terms of security. And that's what we check, and which is the condition to move to this stage. And for adoption, this is still a little bit theory because we haven't reached that yet, but there it's important that we have users, and it's really, projects can prove that they are used in production. So talking about open governance, I think that's really a cornerstone of all this, because open governance is, I think, what makes the difference between an open source project which is just open in words to which is a project which is open in practice. And this is something which is not very well defined. There's no standard definition for it, like for open source. There's no organization which maintains the standard for open governance. So the definition I wrote down here, that's what we use. Open source licensing, of course, is required. That's needed for adoption. But for a sustainable and maintainable collaborative project, we need open governance. And that means we have to have neutral assets. So no single organization, company, vendor, whatever, should be able to control, for example, via the trademark or the domain or critical infrastructure, the project. We need transparent decisions so that the community and everybody and different diverse partners can see what is happening. And it has to be inclusive. So you need to be able to become part of the project if you contribute good things which are in the sense of the project. So this is important, and this is all implemented in the bylaws of the OpenRail Association and in the criteria for the incubation stage. And I would actually love to discuss about that more later with you. What's your view on that? Because for me, this is really one of the underrated challenges we have, which is of course addressed by others, but not always in a consistent way. Then looking more at the practical side, documentation, of course, is an important part. The OpenRail Association is something which is, we are not running the projects. Their projects are independent, but we are providing kind of the common things everybody needs. And we have created a handbook for projects, which in detail describes what you need to do if you are on the different stages, how you get onboarded, and so on. There are the URLs where you can find the documentation. Also, all this is not rocket science, you know that. There's probably also some duplication. I will come to that later as well. But that's, I think, an important deliverable of the organization. We also have the OpenRail transport landscape. I'm mentioning that because it's still a proof of concept and just more or less an idea. But what you have settled, what we want to use is public code YAML to describe projects. That's what we also use to describe the OpenRail projects. And this is nice because it's a good standard. Open code uses it. We are not inventing something new here. Also in terms of tooling, we have a couple of tools which we have developed as part of the OpenRail Association. One is the compliance assistant, which is a way for us to do license compliance, check what is in. It creates S-bombs. So this is up in our repository there as well. Also a tool to manage the GitHub organization. We're trying to do that as code. So one thing what we are trying to do is to automate things and provide consistent management across projects so that we have a consistent view on the projects. And most of this work was done by the technical committee. And one interesting aspect of that, which I think is important from kind of a tactical point of view, is that the technical committee is a very important group there because it's setting an example. It's setting a standard about how to work together. And not by defining something in abstract, but just doing the work in this way. And this reflects to the projects. All projects are represented there. This reflects to the organization because there's the bridge to the board and so on. So this is, I think, in practice, has proved to be a quite effective way for us to establish a culture which is helpful and which is reflecting the open source value. And it comes from an open source mindset because we have open source people in there. It connects all the projects and the participants. So this is one thing where I think for me it was a little bit a surprise how effective it was to just do the work there in the way we want the organization to work, and other people start to imitate. Another question, and we had a full talk about this question earlier, so I don't want to go into much more details there, but this is actually also quite a challenge. For us, it's what is an open source project, what is an open source product? And for us, it's not so much the question, how do we sell the open source project? We are not doing that. These projects in the railway context are something we use more or less internally in the railways. It's more projects, how do you align with the internal company needs? And this might be something like there is an agile process or a scaled agile process, or there's a safe mechanism where people are organizing their work. How do you make this transparent to the outside world, so connecting the internal and the external worlds together? So this is quite, I think, challenging, and we haven't finished the discussion how to do that in the best way yet, but I think that's important to keep in mind. It needs courage. You need to give up some control if you are running an internal product, an internal project which you are making open source. And that's where also, again, the technical committee is, I think, quite an important bridge to translate ideas and make sure that we don't create obstacles there which cause harm. And the last one, and that's also something which, when reflecting on how the organization works and what we achieved there, it's one which came to me as surprisingly important. I mean, it's on one hand kind of obvious communication. We are talking about something we do every day. But when we are talking about open source, we often communicate via code, and it's more about the technical challenges. But the communication actually is a really core function of OpenRail. And in many ways, of course, in one way, we need communication for bringing people together and just organizing everything. But an important function of a public organization like the OpenRail Association is that we reach the people within the companies, sometimes in a better way than if we would talk internally. Because internal channels can be difficult to operate, might be not as visible, but if I give a talk here on a public stage and there's a video, that's much easier to organize outside than to organize inside. So it's a kind of, that's why I put the snooker balls here. It's kind of an indirect way to play the communication. And it's also, and that's something which I've also found quite interesting, even by not explaining the OpenRail Association, just having it as a name and a concept, you have something people can understand, they can connect to, and this helps in a lot of discussion. So you just have to bring up, okay, OpenRail Association, and people understand what you say, and you don't have to talk again about that. So this is something which, for me, surprisingly, it's not always about all the details, but it's just about giving people something in their mind they can connect to. Yeah, and what we have seen is that Also, outreaching to the external community is quite effective, and that's nice. Around the OpenRail Association, we have organized on FOSDEM, the dev room for railways and open transport. And what's really nice to see is we're doing that for the third time, or have done this for the third time now. The projects start to emerge from that, where people meet there and do things together and do things in our space, and things just emerge. So we see that it actually has an impact, it's working, it's starting to ignite a community. So what's the conclusion of all that? One important thing, let's learn from each other. We learned a lot by looking at other associations, at other foundations. Of course, we are copying a lot, we are building on it. We have built more things. You're welcome to learn from that. Of course, we are also here to discuss that. Build on what we do. It's all open source, it's all public, we are all transparent. So this is important. But what I also want to state here is that we have established a really nice way of collaboration and reuse and having building blocks for code. We are quite proficient there. Everything is automated and everything goes together. But for governance, we still have some things to do. Like I said, we have a very clear idea what open source is in terms of licenses. We don't have a clear idea or clear enough idea yet what open governance is, for example. So there's still something to do, and that's one of the reasons why I'm here, and I'm welcoming the discussion around that. So thank you very much.
For somebody so hesitant to start an open source foundation, I personally think you have done very impressive work in a short timeline. Do we have any questions from the audience?
Thank you. If I assume that the majority of your community comes actually from the companies that are participating, meaning their employees, can you say a bit about their motivation, why they're contributing, and maybe also about what red tape they meet, like from their managers or something?
So we don't have a volunteer community. So it's people working in projects within the railways, which are there because they are assigned to these projects because, of course, they want to work for that. What we see is that it's actually the open source projects are quite attractive to work on. Certain kind of people really likes to do that, so we have quite good people actually there working in the projects. But in the end, they are employed by the different railways and work on that as part of their job. So they don't need, I think, a special motivation as a volunteer to invest your spare time in that, but they can do that basically full time on their company time, and that's I think also a nice thing if you're able to do that, if you want to do that as an open source developer.
I'm going to echo Celeste and say you nailed it. I'm so excited about this. My question is about you have these 5 projects. Some of the other umbrella projects or foundations, excuse me, will publish like a roadmap or like I think CNCF calls it like a trail map of potential other spaces where a project is missing or there's a gap in the stack. Have you guys thought about doing something like that that can kind of inspire incubating projects or things like that? Yeah. Yeah, that's something I didn't show that because we have nothing there yet in terms of results, but we are discussing that and we are planning that. So the railways have a pretty specific understanding of what the different business domains are, and what we want to do is really map that in a way that we can see where are the projects, to which areas which projects belong, and also can identify the spots where maybe also open source projects or the open source approach is more effective, so we can really target the areas where we do that. So that's part of what we do want to reflect in this landscape I mentioned, but we don't have anything to show yet. Maybe next time.